The UN has condemned the demand for Qatar to close Al Jazeera, saying it's a major blow to media pluralism. The UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression, David Kaye, says this demand represents a serious threat to media freedom if states, under the pretext of a diplomatic crisis, take measures to force the dismantling of Al Jazeera. He called on the international community to urge Saudi Arabia and its allies not to pursue the demand, and called for them to resist taking steps to censor media in their own territories and regionally. David Kaye is the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, as I mentioned, and he now joins us by Skype from Geneva. It's quite a shocking demand. How unprecedented is it for one government, one country, to ask for the closure of a media organization elsewhere?
Thanks for having me. You know, I can't think of another example that involved one country in a diplomatic contest like this, seeking the closing down of a media outlet in another country. Now, across the Middle East, it's actually somewhat common for states to punish individuals for essentially posting things, saying things about other countries that might be negative. We've seen an uptick in this during the war in Yemen, but the actual demand for the closure of a media outlet, I think, is likely unprecedented here.
Al Jazeera, of course, has a long history of putting opposition figures on television, people who their voices might be suppressed elsewhere in the Arab world. What does the suffocating or the attempt to suffocate independent and credible media mean for civil society, for public discourse, accountability, for the region as a whole?
Well, of course, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. The media is really a public watchdog, right? Its role is to highlight issues so that the public can hold leaders accountable. And as we see across the Middle East, there's really quite limited mass media, mainstream media that is independent, that allows for criticism of government. Criticism of government is actually often criminalized. So the role that Al Jazeera has played in the region over the last 10, 15 years or so has been to open up space. Now, just like with all media outlets, it's not perfect, but it has certainly provided space for discussion, for the highlighting of attacks on civil society, on the lack of democratization across the region. And this kind of attack is really deplorable because of what it would take away from the publics across the Middle East.
We're seeing not only these sort of demands on Al Jazeera, we're seeing some of the countries involved in this blockade bringing out harsh laws to limit people's ability to express themselves on social media as well. Is the region as a whole taking a step backwards from the sort of boundary pushing that was going on during the Arab Spring?
Well, that's true. I mean, the Arab Spring sadly seems like a very distant memory for many activists and journalists across the region. It's become worse over the last several years. There's very limited space for open discussion that's critical of government, and that's across boundaries too. So, I think what we're seeing across the Middle East is an increasingly limited amount of space for the kind of discourse that you need in order to hold officials accountable, and not even just holding them accountable, but to allow people across the region to have, the ability to speak intelligently in an informed way about issues in the public interest. And this is a loss across the region.
All right, David Kaye, good to get your thoughts on that. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.